Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me, as always, is my producer, Kevin Black. Technically, my last show that I'm going to do without one of my co-hosts, Stephen Gillespie, coming back on the Draft Deeper podcast to help talk about some prospects and preview the 2023 NBA draft cycle, as well as my new lead co-host, Maxwell Baumbach. He's also going to be on the Draft Deeper podcast from every episode here on out. When we're talking NBA draft, Maxwell's going to be on, Steven's going to be on. We have an excellent series planned to kick off the 2023 draft cycle. But before we get there, one more quote unquote off-season episode that I wanted to do. I think this show means a lot to me. It may possibly mean a little more to the guests that I have on today, but I've been messaging a few people in the DMs on Twitter back and forth over the offseason, and I've gotten some questions about any advice that I can give anyone who is looking to break into the basketball industry, to become a scout, become a better scout. What are some of the pieces of advice that I can give to anybody out there looking to do what I'm doing, as well as what the team is doing at No Ceilings? And one of these individuals in particular has already started to make a name for himself. He's starting his own basketball/scouting platform called On the Clock. If you want to follow him on Twitter, his handle is at Caleb Mueller 23. You can definitely check out everything with On the Clock there. But most notably, he was also just doing a little bit of content with Rafael Barlow over at NBA Big Board. Rafael posted a video on his YouTube channel. One of the new things he's doing over there on the NBA Draft Junkies YouTube channel is he's essentially having aspiring scouts come and pitch prospects to him. And Caleb chose to talk about Cam Whitmore, who you will hear plenty about Cam Whitmore in podcast episodes to come on the Draft Deeper podcast. I'm excited to talk about him and really see what he's going to give us playing at Villanova this year. But I thought Caleb did a really good job with that. And him and I have been talking about doing a podcast for a while, but just given some of the questions I've gotten recently with some of the chatting I've been able to do with Caleb, I thought my last off-season episode, it would be a perfect opportunity to do a little bit of a Q&A, right? Break away from the usual scouting tropes that we talk about, or I've been doing the NBA Young Core Deep Dive series recently. Just break away from necessarily talking about the intricacies of the game and really more about scouting as a whole, what it means to be in the media industry. How do you grow your own platform? And what are some pieces of advice that I can give anybody who's looking to do the same thing? So Caleb is one of the best people I could have on to do this podcast with. I'll stop rambling. I'll stop going on talking. I got to introduce Caleb. Caleb, what's going on, my man? I'm glad you could join me tonight.
That was a great introduction. I'm happy to be here. Like you said, your show means a lot to you, and this one in particular is a cool thing. But this means a lot to me. Like I said before we went on the air, your show is something that I've referred to and keep me going on the scouting stuff. When you are talking about a prospect and stuff like that, then I go and look at the prospect and try to form my own opinions and merge that with people I'm talking to. And so I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to have you on as well, Caleb. And it trust me when I say that I've been as honored to go on other people's shows as you feel like you are right now. And I've certainly shared those very similar feelings. Who would I be to not allow an opportunity for somebody else to come on and really have a conversation with me, an open dialogue, right? Where it's not one person being above anybody else, but really, Caleb, I feel like you and I are two scouts that can connect on a similar wavelength. Why would I not give that sort of an opportunity to somebody else? I always feel like communication is one of the greatest things that we can have and hold on to in this particular basketball community. And so that's why I think it's excellent that we're doing what we're doing tonight. So before we talk and we go into a few questions and answers about some topics that I know you would like a little more insight on, I want to give you the opportunity, Caleb, to really, I know I plugged your Twitter handle, but really take this time to plug anywhere else that any of my audience at Draft Deeper can find you at. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your story, why you're interested in the game of basketball, why you have a passion for it, and why you're starting this new platform called On the Clock, and really talk to us about what that is.
So, I dropped an article today, and kind of going through like introduction, what is on the clock, and kind of what that means to me, and where I've like gone through my process. And I started playing basketball as a kid, as most of us do, and it stood out as one of my favorite sports. And unfortunately, with that type of passion and stuff like that, they're in a sport like basketball, you can care about it as much as you want, watch it and practice as much as you want. If you're not, if you're not tall, then you're not going to be able to play in high
I
school
know
and
the
things like
feeling.
that. So for me, that was kind of my story on the playing side. And after I was done playing, like middle of high school, I was looking for ways to stay involved with basketball. And I started coaching a little bit and did some coaching work with the YMCA with some of my brother's team, my younger brother's teams and stuff like that, and really started to get into the mindset of like coaching basketball and what that looks like. And then I kind of, moved on from that, and I started looking at ways that I could, I watched so much basketball that I could start, scouting, because it's kind of a similar mindset to coaching, and also being like a point guard is kind of analyzing the court and seeing what's going on, making reads like that are just beyond like what's presented to you right there, but the next play after. And I think that was always something that when I was playing, I was always looking for and just didn't really realize it. And so when I started to, look at options, I'd found this school. It's a school, like an online university called Sports Management Worldwide, and they were doing some classes. And I was like, well, this seems like a good spot to get my foot in the door with this type of stuff. I'd already started kind of doing some draft work. I'd found your show around this time and was like trying to get tuned back into the draft. And I'd always followed like KOC and the Ringer and stuff like that. So it seemed like the next step to kind of, if I wanted to stay in touch with basketball and have it be like a prominent part of my life, I might as well give it a try. So I did the Sports Management Worldwide stuff, made a lot of connections, and that was the biggest takeaway from that. And that what I kind of realized about this industry and kind of getting into it, and you can touch on it, and you've talked about it before, and we could get into it in the Q&A, but it's really about being confident enough to reach out to other people and just have conversations about basketball. You know what I mean? It's really not that difficult to just put your opinions out there in a tangible way that people can see it and refer to it and then respond. And that's what I wanted to do. So I started writing about basketball in a way that I'd never really written about it before. And yeah, that kind of pushed me to come up with the idea of starting a podcast. And from there, things kind of spiraled. I meet some people from my classes, and I pitched some idea that maybe we should start a website. And, I'd done a podcast for the last whole draft process by myself. And, it's fun to talk to yourself, but it gets kind of redundant after a while. So I felt like I needed to move on and find something new. So I kind of had an epiphany one day. It's kind of just one of those things where I was like, you have all these people that that love talking basketball. Why not try and pitch them on an idea? So I pitched them on basically the idea of On the Clock, which is, it started today. Today's been kind of a long day for me. I've been doing a lot of uploading, a lot of editing, a lot of article writing and reading and stuff like that. And it's been exhausting, but I'm so happy to, talk about now what we're presenting, which is kind of like a one-stop platform, like media space for basketball content. And I just kind of want to, it's just, we're trying to do draft work and scout, and we want to just find a way that we can present it to people. And, having a website's an easy way for everybody to find what you got going on. And, we got our podcast. We're coming up with some different series and ideas. I did approach one of your draft ideas a little bit, the top 25 under 20 players that you did with Pierre. And so I took that idea and did like the composite rankings thing and we kind of modeled that, and we're making content like that. We're just really trying to change up, like making tier lists. I just think stuff that's more casual, and then mixing in some of the advanced scouting work, like long articles and reports on prospects, and also like looking in the past. Like we have a really interesting team. It's me, my friend Julian, who I met through my first SMWW class. And so we kind of talked for a while, and then I'd met this guy, Quint, and Nate through other classes and other things. And we have a very interesting, diverse group of philosophies. And I think that's the biggest thing that we enjoy about each other and talking sports with each other, is how different we all view basketball. And when, when you have a bunch of people that all think very differently, are all, kind of talking in a competitive sense with that draft stuff, it gets really interesting. And the entertainment value is there. So that's really all we're doing. It's fun though. It's on ontheclockbasketball.com, ontheclockbb.com, and we're posting podcasts. We got one coming tomorrow with Ersin Demir, who I don't know if you're familiar with Ersin's work on Twitter, Nate, but he's a workhorse on that platform for pumping out basketball into insight. And we're going to talk about some underrated and undervalued players going into the next season. So we'll just have a bunch of content, and it's really just going to let the content speak for itself.
Ersin's been on this podcast before, and you're right. He is.
He's the best. He's a great guy.
He is a workhorse, man. You're not wrong about that one. That I feel like every time I go on Twitter, he has about 5 to 10 different new sets of prospect clips, and I'm just trying to keep up with some of his tweets. So yeah, he's definitely a good worker in the space, and I'm glad to hear some of that story, Caleb. I'm really proud to see somebody else trying to step into the space and create original content and really build off the idea that it's not just one person that can make a platform or a team like that. It's really a group of people that can make something truly special and unique, because you can do some of that idea sharing that you were talking about. And it's great when not everyone has the same viewpoints, because you don't have to argue with one another, right? It doesn't have to become like First Take or whatever hot take show you want to throw out there on the mainstream media. It can very much so be just sharing of ideas and having conversations about why you view a certain way about player X or player Y, and what that person is seeing in their evaluations, and just taking things away and learning from those, right? Learning from those conversations. It's not always you're going to hear something and immediately you're like, all right, the light bulb went on, I'm going to agree with this person. You can more so just take those ideas and see, when you go back and you do your homework, do you actually agree? Do you see where they're going? Do you still find disagreement? And those conversations, those sharing of ideas, that's really what makes this platform so unique, because I can watch the game of basketball. I can flip on a Duke North Carolina game, and you can flip on the same game, and we can talk about a player. We might have seen different things, or maybe you caught something that I didn't, or I caught something that you didn't. And just being able to have such an open dialogue, which is especially what's always going on Twitter, on social media. The draft community is very engaged, very open-minded,
so very engaged. And that's why I love this space. I really do. It's so much more engaged than, football and baseball. I really feel that the basketball community is, that there's a true culture to it on Twitter and the platforms like that.
Absolutely. So it's very easy to find yourself wanting to jump into basketball, dive further into the scouting community, when there is such an open-mindedness in the platform where you're sharing the majority of your content. So I agree with you 100%. I think it's awesome what you're doing. And I can't wait to see more of what you're doing at On the Clock, Caleb. I'll be following your work closely, and hopefully this won't be the last time you and I do some content together. So let's dig into what we really wanted to do on this podcast. So Caleb, like I said at the top, one of my ideas that I had was, just given some of the feedback I've gotten and some of the questions I've been asked, why don't we just turn this podcast into a little bit of a Q&A? And so you took the opportunity this week to write down some questions that really intrigue you, questions that you definitely want to hear my answer to, but also not just for your own personal benefit, but really questions I feel like you think this will be for the benefit of my audience as well as your audience, and anybody else out there really looking to break more into the game of basketball, into the media industry as a whole. And I think you came up with some really awesome questions, and I'm happy to answer some of them. I'm also happy to turn some of them back on you and get some of your takes and feedback on them as well. Really quickly, before we do that, though, I mentioned that you did that video with Raphael at the top. I do want to ask you, what made you choose Cam Whitmore as a prospect that you definitely wanted to pitch? I guess this can be the quote unquote preview to the preview, right? The preview to the 2023 preview on Draft Deeper. Talk to me about Cam Whitmore and why you wanted to talk about him.
Well, I mean, the first thing when I first saw Cam Whitmore a couple of years ago was the athleticism. I mean, his athleticism and his combination of strength with his bounce, it gets anybody excited. But then when I saw him again, this with the FIBA stuff, mostly with the U Americas circuit, he just shot the ball. Like he just looked like he was so much more confident with the same stroke that I'd seen in the past. And he displayed over, I'd seen some mid-range flashes and stuff like that. And I just think he projects as a dominant 3-level wing scorer. And you just don't get a lot of those. And often those are the players that are making a lot of impact on championship teams I've seen. And for me, like, I think that that's a top 3 pick compared to like the other guys. And that's really where I said, and the pitch with Raphael is, when I look at drafts, I look at always in relative to the players that they're in the draft class. So with, I never try to get overexcited about a guy and start comparing them to guys in different classes, because in reality, you're drafting them and compared to the people that he's drafted against. And there's no way that I would take the Thompsons at this moment, either of them, over a guy like Cam Whitmore, like, because I just have faith that over the next year, Cam Whitmore is going to get so much more progression at a university like Villanova than they're going to get an overtime elite. And then you start comparing his game strictly to, guys like Derek Whitehead. And I just think Cam Whitmore's on a different level. The interior finishing package for me is like, I just have so much fun watching him play. Like when he's able to just hop, step, take a big bounce and just throw it over somebody. Oh, like, I mean, that's what you love about basketball, is it's so physical and there's such explosive athletes. And he's one of the most explosive I've seen watching like high school tape, really.
I agree with you. I am incredibly intrigued about his game. And one of the reasons why I asked you that question was because I believe one of the first questions you're going to ask me relates to what I specifically look for in prospects. So why don't you go ahead and ask that question, Caleb? Let's start talking about some specifics to scouting prospects.
So I said, what are the top 3 traits you use to rate prospects? And that can be like, for me, when I think of traits, I think of like versatility. So that guy has offensive or defensive versatility, can play or guard multiple positions. Their resume, like, if it's a European player like Luka, now we can start to account for stuff like that. You get the point. Physical traits, things of that nature.
So it's very hard to narrow it down to 3 things, but I tried. And I think 3 things that I've talked about at length on this podcast when I'm evaluating prospects, I'll start it out. The physical tools, that's an obvious one, right? Does a prospect have above average measurables? Do they have that +3, +4 or greater wingspan? Do they have plus size for their position? So in other words, if they're at one of the guard spots, are they a 6-foot guard? Are they a 6'1" guard? Or are they a 6'3", 6'4", 6'5" guard with length, right? Who is able to see over the defense, who is going to be able to better contain matchups on the perimeter because they have the length along with the foot speed and the quickness to essentially play somebody much better at the point of attack. Or if they don't have some of those plus physical tools, if they are a little undersized, if they only have an average wingspan, do they have other difference-making physical abilities to essentially make up for those plus areas that I just outlined? So Jay Ivey is an example of this, right? So he's better positioned as an off guard right now than necessarily a full-time point guard. So he's 6'4" at the off guard spot. He does have good length, but what he has in turn is he has game-breaking speed, right?
His first step is lethal.
He has a lethal first step, game-breaking speed in the open court. He can get to virtually any spot he wants to on the floor at any given moment, and that's an equalizer for him. So if he's being guarded by a bigger wing, chances are he can still get around a lot of those guys and he can still get to where he needs to on the court. And in today's game, it's really just becoming a bigger man's game, right? Some of these smaller guards who don't have that outlier burst or quickness or speed or awesome vertical to essentially get their jump shot off with the right amount of lift to shoot it over some of these bigger, tougher defenders. Those players who aren't able to live up to those physical tools that I'm talking about, they have a much harder time to prove themselves as to whether they're actually going to succeed in the NBA. And those physical tools, I mean, that applies to wings, it applies to big men when we talk about foot speed, when we talk about what kind of hands they have. It's not just how tall they are or how long they are. There's plenty of other aspects that go into physical tools, but really that's one of the biggest components I think we need to start with is the physical tools in terms of measurables, as well as overall athletic ability. If you don't check certain boxes and you don't meet certain requirements, you're going to have a much tougher time projecting them into the NBA, into the next level that they're going to be playing up. So that's really the first big thing. The second thing I would say is shooting ability. And this has become so much more important, particularly over the last few years, than I think it was in years past, right? Like we could look at a prospect and we could look at their form. We could judge how the ball comes off their hands. Are they straight up and down? Do they not lean back on their shot? Are they balanced when they shoot? We can look at some of what their form looks like. Is it a repeatable motion? And even if some of the shots don't always go in, even if they're not shooting the highest of percentage, what we could say back then was, well, we're still going to look at what we see on film and we're going to project that this player is going to shoot. Well, because of what I talked about at first in regards to physical tools, in regards to the size of prospects, these guys are bigger, they're better athletes, they're contesting out on shots quicker. Not a lot of players are getting as many open shots, in my opinion, as they once used to. So a lot more looks are contested, which means that I think it benefits paying attention to not just what it looks like, but also really the results, in particular, contested versus uncontested situations. And if these guys aren't making a certain percentage of these shots from the perimeter on contested looks, you're not going to be able to sell them as well in the NBA game when the NBA is just clearly going to a different level from a physicality standpoint, from an athleticism standpoint. The NBA game today is absolutely ridiculous, man. Like I'm evaluating some of these prospects to go up to the next level. And I find myself, I'm like, I just come back to, can this guy actually really succeed at the same way in college as he did in the NBA? And there's just fewer and fewer and fewer guys, in my opinion, who are really making starter level cases in college. And a lot of it comes back to not just the physical stuff I talked about, but the shooting ability. Are they consistent perimeter threats? Are you going to be a guy who not only can you knock down open spot up shots, but can you make those contested shots? Can you come off of movement? Can you come off a screen, square yourself up, turn, and really have that quick trigger to be able to fire up over a tough or a bigger defender? Do you have any sort of one-on-one creation ability from the perimeter? Can you create your own shot? And can you get that up over somebody else? And can you do that at an efficient level, particularly in the mid-range? That's one of the best separators you and I know, Caleb, in terms of star potential. Do you actually have that one-on-one creative ability? So you mentioned with Cam Whitmore, the finishing package, which I agree with you 100%. And I'm sure I'll talk about that on a future podcast. Some of the things that he can do around the basket because of how athletic he is, because of how much hang time he gets. It's ridiculous. It's unreal. But the first question that Raphael asked you in the video was, do you buy some of his shooting consistency, right? And I do. I think he's going to project to be just fine from three. But if he's not just fine from three, if he's a below average shooter, defenses can sag off him. They can play back and they can limit his ability to get to the basket effectively so that he can take advantage of some of that finishing ability. So you need to be able to bring defenders out to you, and you need to be able to make tough contested shots in multiple situations if you're truly going to be one of those role players who's counted on to be a 30+ minute starter in the NBA. So that's another reason why I would pick shooting ability. And then the last thing isn't necessarily tied directly to the action that's happening on the court. It's not something that's involved in a certain play type per se. It's not their handle or their shooting ability or the coordination. I chose motor and communication really as a package deal. That's great. I think these two combined enough into one trait for me. And they both impact the game because they can make or break any individual player. Is a player actually hustling on a consistent basis? Are they getting back on defense? Are they pushing in transition? Are they crashing the glass, following their own shot, following somebody else's shot? Are they diving for the loose ball? Do they play like they actually give a shit? That's so important when we talk about motor. Though it's not that we should look at a prospect and say because they aren't diving for every single loose ball on the floor that they won't succeed in the NBA. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not bringing this up as into maybe with the physical tools or the shooting ability. If one of those two things aren't there, it can be a major detriment to a prospect's case. I'm not saying a prospect can't succeed in the NBA if they aren't showing some of these things in college or at a lower level in basketball, but I do think it's a separator. It can be an incredibly positive indicator.
Like you said,
and more
to be a starter in the league, you have to really have a high proficiency in one of the three things that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think more often than not, guys who play with a very hot motor, they tend to succeed more often than not, right?
Well, I mean, I'll pitch you on another prospect right now, Duron Holmes. This is a guy that he as a center prospect, this class besides Ware and Lively is pretty thin. So and Wembanyama obviously, but Duron Holmes is one of those guys that gives me the Robert Williams vibes of like where he's such a high motor player and communicates so well on offense and does all those like Draymond type, screen, rescreen, catch the ball in the elbow, dribble, handoff actions, stuff like that. As a player, when I was playing basketball, it's more recent for me, I guess, that I always valued myself playing with the high motor. So naturally, as a scout, that's just one of the things I feel like I have to look for and acknowledge when I do see it.
You don't have to sell me on Duron Holmes, my friend. Trust me. I got about half of Dayton's team written down as a potential prospect for the 2023 NBA draft.
Really fun to watch.
Dayton's going to be one of my best watches, I think, in college basketball this year. I would agree with you. The other half to the motor
really high on him. My colleague Julian's really high on Duron Holmes. So you'll have to hear more from us on our own show. But
I think my audience will be looking forward to hearing more about the Duron Holmes.
We'll do some Duron Holmes stuff coming soon. Don't worry about it, Nate. We got it on the way.
I bet you do, man. And then the other half to what I was talking about along with the motor is also communication. And I've brought up this point so many times on this podcast platform, but I don't see it stressed enough in some of the circles that you'll see the majority of people hanging out in on social media, or it's not a big thing that I see brought up in a lot of auditory scouting reports, written scouting reports, but communicative ability, I think, is so important because you need to be able to effectively communicate with your teammates, direct traffic, make sure that everybody around you knows what's going on. You need to be able to make the right call outs during certain plays, but it's not just in the action, it's also away from the action, right? When a player's talking to a teammate and they're talking about something that happened on the court and they're giving feedback, or maybe they have to take some feedback. Maybe this player made a mistake and they have to listen to what they did wrong in order to better correct it for the next trip down the floor. They need to be able to take that criticism, receive it the right way, and communicate it back the right way, as well as they need to be able to obviously make some of those same points to others, but they need to be able to properly communicate with their teammates, not just call them out and do it in a negative way, but do it in a positive enough way to where it can be received as positive criticism, constructive criticism, and their teammates can take it the right way to better absorb it, so that there's no negativity, there's no ongoing negativity between those two guys. They can function on the court and know that the lines of communication are open. There's that trust that's there that comes with just being better teammates. I can venture to say a lot of the best teams in the NBA that have built relationships and that have played with each other over the course of a number of years, they have that level of trust. They have that communicative ability to where they can turn to each other. They can talk with one another about anything. And they may have some disagreements and some spats every once in a while, but at the end of the day, they can patch those holes up because they can communicate, because they trust each other. And that same sort of communication goes with players as well as the coaching staff, right? Like, players have to be able to receive criticism the right way from coaches on the coaching staff. And in turn, they need to be able to properly communicate, their hopes for what they want the offense or the defense to look like, or maybe some opportunities where they feel like they should have some more time on the ball or be doing certain things within the course of the game. Being able to communicate with everybody else around you, to be open, to be positive, that's such an important thing in life. It's certainly an important thing that I've found in my workplace and working at my day job, as well as everybody else here in No Ceilings. We can all communicate great with one another. And it's also certainly something that needs to take place on the basketball court, communication, right? So those are my top three standout things that I really take to heart when I evaluate prospects. And there's plenty more. There's position by position things that I can take a look at, but those three things I feel like now more than ever have to sort of be across every single prospect, regardless of position.
Yeah,
so
I absolutely agree.
That's my answer to that question. And I'm glad that you were able to give some of your insight as to what you look for, Caleb, as well. Where do you want to go next?
Well, I had a follow-up question that I didn't even send you that I
go for it.
But you kind of answered it with your last one, which is what qualities do you feel get undervalued? And so, I mean, you kind of touched on it with the communication stuff. But then I said I wanted to know if you feel like any qualities get overvalued by the scouting community.
Any qualities that would get overvalued?
Yeah.
You know, I think the whole basketball IQ phrase, and I've been incredibly guilty of this in the past. I think sometimes that gets a little overblown. And I've mentioned it in regards to defensibility from prospects, right? Like I think guys going into the NBA are sometimes a little too harshly criticized on the defensive end. It's one thing if you don't see the motor there, right? You don't see the hot motor. You don't see them willing to actually sit down, get in the stance and defend, or the willingness to do the right things. But there's this phrase that gets thrown around. And again, I've been plenty guilty of it. Basketball IQ, which is essentially saying that we don't think a player's smart enough to operate at a certain level within the game of basketball. And I think more often that's being found to be false. And I think it's just because the NBA game is so fast. It's incredibly difficult to process what's going on the court at the speed it is with the players that are actually playing the game, right? You see all of these guys with incredible size and incredible length, and they're moving at the speed of light in comparison to you. And when you're trying to defend and essentially guard multiple positions and maneuver yourself around the court, and are we switching? Are we dropping? What kind of decisions are we making on a split second? You're having to do those things at the college level, but it's not quite the same at the NBA level. It's a shorter shot clock. These guys are much better at processing the game. They've been doing this for years. You're going up against vets who have been running the same plays out of the playbook. They've been playing with the same players. They know what to do, and they're going to do it quick because they know how to do it so effectively. And you're a young player coming into the NBA. You're trying to figure everything out on the defensive end first and foremost. You're trying to just figure out how to be a professional, right? And there's just so much that can be overwhelming for a rookie or even a sophomore still trying to make their way in the NBA. And young guys are going to be bad at defense. They're going to make mistakes. There's going to be lapses. But the most important thing to come back to, it's not that we should say that they didn't see what happened and they got the blinders on and therefore because they can only look at one area of the floor right now, that they don't have a high basketball IQ. They're not able to process everything. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. And that's something that I want to get away from using a little bit, right? I think that we could technically use that, sure, but when you get more practice playing at the NBA level and you just have more time to where you've seen more things and you know how to react to more things, I think we start hearing the basketball IQ thing brought up less and less the older a player gets in the NBA. And therefore, I think we need to retire it a little bit in regards to the scouting community, particularly on the defensive end. I think these kids just need to have the chance to play against better, quicker, faster competition and to take their lumps and really learn something from them. It's not that they don't have that IQ or that smart or that ability. It's just that they haven't seen a lot of this stuff yet at the speed that they're used to. And they need to learn from it. They need to go through it. So that's really, I think, something, I think one phrase that's been overvalued in the community, and myself included. I think we need to turn away from it just a little bit. What do you think about that, Caleb?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I definitely don't. I think in the past people have buried, like you said, defensive prospects for a lot of like their lapses when, really guys are, you look at the guys early on in their career, players like, I don't know, I mean, off the top of my head, like Mo Bamba really with his physical tools should have been a much better defensive player off the jump. And, he just needed some adjusting and needed some time to adjust. And they kind of, I mean, the Magic didn't really give up on him, but I mean, they kind of gave up on him. They didn't really pushed him up to those minutes, and they look to acquire other big men elsewhere. So you get players like that, not even just draft prospects, but I think with the defensive stuff, especially with the IQ and just learning how to play the game, I think a lot less players, especially young players, should get buried or traded and given up on, because they're not able to adjust. A guy that I'd like to see really turn his career around is Marvin Bagley. Like, that's a guy who, he has got all the physical tools in the world to be an impact player around the basket, and just kind of hasn't really figured out where his main area of impact is. And I think if a guy like him, gets in the lab, watches some film, figures out his positioning, works a little bit harder on the defensive end, he could carve out a nice career still.
Marvin Bagley is an interesting reclamation project that's going on right now with the Detroit Pistons. I've talked with him, with Coach Bryce, talked about Marvin Bagley plenty. I'm curious to see where his career goes next, and to see if Detroit can unlock more of who I thought he was before he came out of the draft, which was a pick and roll big man, right? Not a corner spacer, not somebody who you want playmaking or doing things off the dribble with the ball in their hands. Somebody who can be an efficient and easy play finisher and be more effective in transition, really put him in more of a north-south role than anything else. And I don't feel like the Sacramento Kings. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, like you said, I just felt like he really could have been better used as a rim runner and used to push pace instead of have the ball in his hands.
No, I agree with you 100%. And so I'm curious to see where his trajectory ends up as we go through this next season with him and the Detroit Pistons. So what's your next question, Caleb?
I think that it'd be good to move on, since we're kind of talking about how like people can improve and progress with IQ. Like, what are your strategies to improve as a scout? I guess like that's kind of a broad question, but like what areas have you kind of reflected on? I know that you touched on, and I'll say for myself as well, a big part of taking some time away from doing podcasting every day and stuff like that, and kind of just taking time to reflect, is looking for ways to improve and get better as not only a basketball viewer, but as a critique of the game and its players. So I was curious if you had anything that you're looking to improve.
So some advice that I can give in terms of improving as a scout, I wrote down a few points for this. So my first one was never stop asking questions and sharing ideas and observations with others. If you come into a game and you sit down to watch a prospect or study a few prospects, and you think you know everything about that player's game, and you think you know everything that's going to happen on the court, that's when you can really lose yourself in the evaluation, right? And that's what you don't want to happen. You always want to be asking questions. You always want to take a new perspective into every game you watch, every player you study, and sure, certainly to ask why, but really to continue to be open-minded and to always look for answers to things that you might not have even thought you would have a question about. Just stay open-minded when you're asking. And then when those questions do come up, ask those questions to yourself, but also don't be afraid to share those ideas and ask those questions to your peers. And you were talking about that earlier, Caleb. One of the things that you've learned is certainly to network and really be able to share your ideas with others who have similar interests to yourself, because that sharing of ideas is when we can get better, right? Different things can be identified to us, and in turn, we can sit and reflect on those and think about why didn't we see the answer to that question before? What was stopping us from seeing that answer? Maybe it was something completely new to us. It gives us an opportunity to learn, but never sit down in front of a game or at a game and think that you have all the answers yourself. Always be ready to learn new information. Always be ready to ask questions. That's definitely something that I want to prioritize more of again this year, as I really try to do every year, but still coming into a new year fresh. I've seen a lot, but I certainly haven't seen everything. And I never want any sort of arrogance like that to take over any sort of my scouting evaluations, right? I always want to come in new. I always want to come in asking questions, and I want to be open-minded. And along with being open-minded, another important thing that goes along with that is don't be afraid to be wrong and change your evaluation as you gather new information, right? I think anchoring bias is a topic that's talked about plenty on social media. Definitely don't remain handcuffed to an old opinion. When you learn new information, you see something different, and you recognize a new opportunity for a player that you didn't think was there before. Don't just hold on to your old opinions and think, oh, well, this player only made, this many jump shots in like one game, right? And it's a very small sample size. Take everything that happens in front of you and every single thing that you see and add it to your database of information. Go back, study those things, learn why that might have happened in that particular game. What were the context of those shots? Did he get more open shots than he was used to? Did he just have a really good night shooting contested shots? Like, go and examine every single thing and take everything as a data point. You don't need to overvalue certain things more than others, but be able to take everything as a data point. And especially when things show up in front of you that could prove an original point wrong, don't just dismiss those to hold on to your original thought or your original notion. Always be open-minded and willing to change your evaluation as you gather new information. Another big one for me is to study the trends of the level ahead of the current one you're evaluating to get a better feel of what's important and necessary to earn a rotation spot in the level ahead. So if you're scouting for the NBA and you're watching a lot of college games, don't just completely throw yourself into the world of college basketball and ignore everything that's going on in the NBA. It's important to try and find a healthy balance of studying both levels so that you're very aware of what's going on in the NBA. What are the trends, and how can some of the players in this upcoming draft class better help teams succeed in following where those trends are going? And I think that's something I've talked about that on this podcast platform as well, but something I really want to prioritize and emphasize more going into this next draft cycle is to not spend too much of my time in college basketball, to keep watching the NBA, keep familiarizing myself with roster constructions, what teams are going to be looking for in the draft, what are their needs. And that only makes me a better scout in turn, because then I can properly identify which prospects might be better fits elsewhere, which prospects have these certain tools that maybe at one time weren't always important with where the league was, but given where the league could be going, maybe they could have a new role in the NBA. Maybe they have a chance to actually get drafted because they can play a role that's more important than it used to be. So that's certainly something that I'm looking to emphasize for myself a lot more this year. And then the last thing, Caleb, that I want to say to answer your question is basketball isn't just numbers or models or measurements. And I think when you remember that point as a scout and you use it to bring yourself back to the motor point that we talked about earlier, or the communication point that we talked about earlier, players are people too, right? So finding out information about them as people when you can is so important to completing an evaluation, right? Like heart and spirit drive athletes like the rest of us in life. And those who are playing the game for the right reasons and deeply care about who they're playing with, those are generally the guys who you see who are going to come out on top. Just like that can absolutely be the case in every aspect outside of sport as well. So I think talent is important, but there has to be more than just more than that for a player to reach their potential, right? So I think,
yeah, I mean, when a guy looks like he's having fun playing basketball, he's a more fun player to watch.
that that is 100% the case all the time. So I think that might have been another answer to one of your follow-up questions, like what do I feel is undervalued in the scouting community? Just remembering that basketball players are people too, and it's important to try and find out some tidbits about these guys or have conversations and get to know some of their aspects about them besides just what they do on the basketball court. There's always information to be gathered that can swing an evaluation one way or another. And just remembering that, I think, is a simple thing to help oneself improve as a scout, something that's a little bit off the board that you might not think about when you're just popping on game X or game Y when you're watching some film. What do you think about all the answers I just gave?
Great. I mean, they're the same answers that I would give, honestly, Nate. I mean, not exactly the same. I wouldn't word them all the same, but same building blocks. I mean, for me, I think, especially as I've grown up and playing basketball, and now only just recently really started to look at it as a scouting, from the scouting perspective and kind of putting on that lens. And it took a while, honestly, to be able to start watching the game like that. But I'd say that the number one thing, like you said, about like heart and the motor and stuff like that, I just think that that's the most underrated aspect. And it kind of segues to the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, which was some of your favorite draft prospects ever. But I'll say, for as far as it goes, from some of my favorite players that I like to watch and have fun and have improved my love for the game, it's I have a huge infatuation with like high end role players. Like I love the 6th and 7th, 8th guy. Those are my favorite players because I feel like those guys more or less make up really the heart and soul of your team. Guys like Matthew Dellavedova, Tony Allen, Alex Caruso, Mo Spates, like Reggie Evans, guys like that bring either, you see it more in like the 80s and 90s where guys had to be like physical enforcers on the court when the game was more physical. And I think today there's less players like that, but I think you have bigger personalities because media is such a prominent thing. And I think trash talking is probably more of like a prominent thing now than it's ever been. I just think it's like really kept in the low. But I mean, people get clips of crazy stuff that's said during games. But I mean, I want my players to be in the ear of the other team, letting them know, what they're gonna do to them before they do it on the court. Like I want my guys that have to care about winning, and to care about passion, and because when you build your locker room with those players, the expectation that those guys have in their head. And it always brings me back to reading Michael Jordan's book and reading about him and Steve Kerr, how they fought at practice. And it was because Steve Kerr was saying to Michael Jordan that he was dogging it at practice. And like Michael Jordan was like, "You can't say that to me. I'm Michael Jordan." And Steve Kerr, like said some stuff, and Michael Jordan punched him and left. And if that team won a championship, I mean, like you kind of touched on, and it kind of reminded me of the Warriors teams. They bend and break throughout a season. Like you look at the Bucks more recently, and some of their season to season turnarounds where they just have these dramatic implosions. I'm a Bucks fan from Wisconsin, so you would see these dramatic implosions in their Eastern Conference finals against the Raptors, and then they turn around and regather. They went back and learned some things, and they communicate with each other and pushed each other. And you see Giannis is one of those guys like a Michael Jordan who maybe does his leadership in a different way. But when you put guys like that in your locker room that want to lead and want to push others to be great, that's when you get really great team basketball. And that's when the game's at its best.
I agree 100%. You perfectly illustrated my prior point of communication, which also obviously flows through everything I just talked about with improving as a scout. And yeah, it's different examples of leadership. There's more than one way to skin a cat, right? There's more than one way to get a job done. Giannis is a little bit of a different leader. He's a vocal guy. He's an incredible communicator. He just does it in a different way, but he still rallies the troops and gets everyone together around him to fight for the same goal, which is to win an NBA championship. And if you have a whole locker room filled with those guys, imagine how much more successful your team can be when you're all able to communicate with one another, to effectively get your points across
with each other, not just
to be honest, to be transparent. Like, imagine how much better your team can be when it's filled with all sorts of players who can do that one thing.
When you trust each other, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Nate.
No, go ahead.
Well, I mean, when you trust each other on and off the court, and you can have these good verbal communication, this is the biggest thing that I think when you look at a team like the Warriors and why they're so explosive offensively and just as good on the defensive end, is because they have so much chemistry with each other that their nonverbal communication is impeccable. I mean, they don't have to say anything to each other, and Steph Curry will go exactly to the spot on the floor that is open, and Draymond Green will find him. And they know where each other are going to be. And when you have that type of trust in your teammates, you can create beautiful things like that. You know, you look at the Spurs teams, you know, that I grew up watching in 2013, 2014. Those teams with Tim Duncan, Kawhi, Tony Parker, Manu, Boris Diaw, you know, Patty Mills, all those teams, Gerald Green or Danny Green, they all had great nonverbal communication. Were able to work as a cohesive unit all the time. And I just think that that's another thing that comes with that communication.
No, like I said, I agree 100%. It's such an important part of the game. And I don't think enough real people realize that it is such an important part of the game. And to everyone out there listening and they're hearing us give like 10, 15 minutes worth of podcast to the topic of communication. And they're looking around, they're thinking, well, if I'm just watching games on tape or I'm watching a game on TV, how am I supposed to notice these things? And you just have to keep your eyes peeled, right? Like obviously the camera isn't going to show you everything on a television broadcast that you and I are talking about, but there are things that you can pick up. There's times where you can observe players having conversations on camera. You can certainly observe anytime the camera pans to like a timeout, a team huddle, you can pick up on certain things. You can turn your eyes to the sidelines. It's not always in person, but there are things that you can pay attention to on film.
Well, when you're on television, they'll give you moments where they'll show a player showing emotion. You just got to take what you can get for it. Is that for the camera? Does that look like he's genuinely fired up? And then you can see like the communication between each other. The biggest thing that I look for is how do guys react to be taken in and out of the game and who they're playing with at certain times. I think that that's super important to look at bench players, especially young bench players. Does a guy, when he first comes into the game in the first quarter of the second half and off the bench and he gets it going, and then the coach takes him out maybe a little bit sooner than he thinks, and he comes back in and just, is kind of average. Maybe that can paint a narrative to you in the back of your head, and it just gives you more information. There's more things to infer from and be like, maybe he doesn't like that situation there. He wants to be playing more. This guy maybe has a higher ceiling and just not showing it. And just isn't in the right situation. And there's different things that you can work through in your mind as a scout to check boxes for, because I kind of keep like a checklist in my head. I don't know what you do in your head, but when I think about prospects, I'm just like, oh, this guy's got this aspect, and this aspect. If a guy's a good teammate and things like that, I like to make sure I note those when I'm watching the game.
Whether you're taking mental notes or writing notes down, always take notes. Take detailed notes. I can't stress that enough for any scouts who are looking to get better at this. You're not going to remember every single little thing from watching a game when you're trying to recall it all back. If you take detailed notes of not only just the result, but what happened to lead to the result, and you do that for every single play that happens throughout the game, you're going to have so much of a deeper understanding as to what actually happened in that game. And you're going to be able to read it and recall it and remember it. And being able to call upon those certain details when you're in the midst of an argument or you're trying to make a pitch for a player or present a certain prospect's case, those are the kinds of things that can separate one scout from another. So that's an important point as well. Not directly related to what we were talking about, but certainly an important point nonetheless. But yeah, you and I, Caleb, we just shared some good thoughts about things and certain things you can watch and look at when you're watching a game on tape. But obviously, it all comes back to the networking point. It comes back to building relationships, cultivating relationships, being able to talk with people who you trust, right? To get these certain pieces of intel that can help better shape your opinion, right? For better or for worse. Sometimes it's not always positive, but you need to be able to develop and cultivate those sources, network, build those connections, and get yourself in the gym, get yourself to games, get yourself to practices so that you can observe all of these little things, right? Like I don't go to a game just to specifically see what's going to happen through the course of it and to see, what this play looks like, or see the result, or I come to see a prospect I'm looking forward to scouting. I need them to have this awesome 20-30 point game. That's not why I'm going to the game. I'm going to the game to get there, to watch warmups, to watch these interactions, to try and network and meet people. I'm going to a game or a practice to do all of the things that I can't get from the tape. If I want to watch the game, I can pull up the game. I have access to any game at any time virtually, and that's so easy for even the guy, the scout who's just starting out. They can have some of the same subscriptions that I do. They can watch film at any time. That's not why you go to the game. You go to the game to get an understanding about everything else that's going on. So that's another piece of advice I can give young scouts, is to not only get in the building, but get in the building for the right reasons. Don't just go there to purely sit in the stands, watch the game, and think that you're going to come away with this amazing, rocket brain idea of like, oh, well, I saw this in person, so it's going to change my life every time I watch their film from here on out. It should be to watch the warmups, watch how they interact with their teammates, notice how they interact with their coaching staff. How do they carry themselves? What's their warm-up routine look like? And then talk to some of the people who they're talking to. Try and talk to a team manager. Try and reach out to a video coordinator. Try and reach out to a coach. Get into a practice. Talk to some of these people and build real relationships with these people, right? Actually try and build friendships in this community, but then also be able to have conversations about prospects and learn more about them as people, and further your understanding about the game, and take away some real things from those relationships and those conversations. And it's when you can build out that network, and you can have so many trusted sources in the game of basketball, people who you can lean on, people who you can talk to at any given moment about anything. That's what makes the game so great. That's what makes this profession so great. You never know who you're going to run into. You never know who you can have a conversation with. But as you said earlier, Caleb, just having the confidence to go out there and have these conversations and make it happen, and have the belief in yourself that you can talk about the game with anyone at any time. And, you know that you have a certain level of understanding about the game. You're open to learning more, but that you have the confidence that I'm just trying to get better at this. I don't have all the answers, but that doesn't mean I can't have a conversation with so-and-so because they might know some things about basketball that I don't. That's not what any of this should be about. It's about going after it and understanding you're passionate about the game, and you want to do every single thing you can to improve 1% every single day. And so that's why really one of the biggest things I can pitch on improving as a scout is what we've talked about, Caleb. It's the communication piece, but it's also just the belief in yourself to go out there, live to your passion, know that you're doing what you love, and letting that be what carries you through basketball, not the end result.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that what it's about? Isn't it because we love this game? I mean,
that's exactly what it's about.
Me. I have such a hard time. Honestly, I have such a hard time the last like 2 or 3 days, not just like tweeting on like the stuff like where I'm starting to promote the stuff I've been working on for like the last 2 months with my friends, and we've really been pushing each other to crank out stuff that's quality. Like we don't want to just half-ass it. That's not what we're about. So when we're pushing each other, and it's been kind of weighing on us, so for us to be at this moment where now we're like, okay, let's open the doors, let's reveal everything that we've been cooking up. And it's just hard not to be like, man, I just love basketball. And I just the last couple of days, it's been hard not in every tweet to just be like, I love basketball, this is so fun. Like I can't believe that I'm really like pursuing my passion like that. And I think that anybody who is interested in really like pursuing that passion, reach out to me. Like my DMs are open on Twitter. Like I've amounted to nothing. I've did one cycle of scout work, but I think that I've tapped out into a couple of things that from learning from people like Nate, learning from people like Raphael and other people in the community about what it takes to, not to be the best, but to just want to improve every single day. And that involves watching basketball. And for me, that's a dream come true.
It's a passion. It's absolutely living up to your passion. And by the time everyone out there listens to this podcast or is listening to this podcast, we'll have already published a piece on NoCeilingsNBA.com. Just a very short piece this week, but really emphasizing the greatest lesson I've learned in basketball, which is to find your passion, fall in love with the game, and let that continue to be the guiding force behind your work. Don't look for the clicks. Don't look for the money. Don't look for the results. Because if you're only looking for those things, there's going to be other people out there who may have more success than you do at any given moment. They might be getting attention that you're not, or having conversations that you're not. And if you're not waking up and doing this every day for the love of the game, you're going to find disappointment in other areas in your professional life or in your basketball life. That's just the way that it is. And I've seen some people on social media lately who have felt a little bit discouraged. They don't feel like they're standing out from the pack or sharing any new information or new ideas. And the reality is, I say things on this podcast that certainly may not be new or original, but that's not what it's about. I'm doing this. Everyone at No Ceilings is doing it because we love it and because we're going to continue to keep doing it. We don't care ultimately what the end result is. Do we all want to be paid and working in jobs in basketball? And do we want to make this our careers? Absolutely. Of course, that's a big reason why we're doing it. But really the biggest factor behind the podcasting, the writing, the media, is because we just love basketball, man. And we want to keep talking about it, and we want to meet new people, and we want to share those ideas, and we want to get better. And if you lose track of that, and it's okay to, because I've certainly lost track of it at times as well. And in doing this for 2+ years, this podcast, but really trying to, get better at scouting. I've been in pursuit of a career in basketball for a decade. It's been a long enough time for me, and I haven't stopped. I've never given up because I just love the game that much. And so that's what I would tell anybody out there listening to this podcast who has felt discouraged, who has thought about stopping creating content or taking a break. And it's okay to take a break, but don't ever just stop, right? Don't give up if you truly have fallen in love with the game. Let that love carry you over the course of your career, and you'll be amazed where it can take you. I've been amazed in just these 2 years, and just even this 1 year with us forming No Ceilings. I've been incredibly amazed with the journey that we're already on, and we're not even close to being where we want to be, or where this journey is not even close to being finished. And yet I'm amazed every single day. So just let that passion, let that love for the game carry you to new heights. I don't ever want to see anybody who I know who is in the content creation business to not create content anymore. I want everybody on the platform. I want everybody to have a voice, because the more people I can share ideas with, the better I can get as an evaluator. And hopefully I can help someone else get a little bit better as an evaluator, just sharing a different viewpoint or a different opinion, and having a conversation with somebody, but most importantly, encouraging everyone else out there. I truly love the time that I get, that I can share with others, and I can encourage others, and hopefully inspire somebody else to start their own platform like you, Caleb, or to be a better scout. That's what all of this is really about. And I want to see everyone succeed. I want to see everyone thrive. It's a big enough space. We can all succeed. We can all thrive if we all just work together and we all combine to embrace the love that we all have, which is for the game of basketball. That's what it's all about.
I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's experiences like this where it shows that there's people out here that are, people like Nate that really want to help you improve and are always looking to provide their insight, whether it's basketball related stuff or career related stuff. And that's why I really just, every day, like I said, I love basketball, and this community is awesome.
So Caleb, I think you had a question written down regarding some of my greatest hits and misses.
I want to hear you brag about some of your big swings here.
So my greatest quote unquote hits and misses, I actually wrote 2 previous columns. They're up on NoCeilingsNBA.com. One of the fun off-season things I did was I revisited some of those. I would say my greatest hits that I thought about, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Donovan Mitchell were 2 of my most fun hits that I think I've had in scouting. And it's because I was so genuinely curious about both of their games that I took the time to study the film. And sometimes I didn't understand what either of them were doing on the court, especially SGA. And I've talked about this in podcast form as well, where SGA is just so slithery. He's so smooth. And some of the things he does, you can't fully put it into words, but you know that the end result happened and it looked good. And he made so many of those plays in high school when I was watching his high school tape. When he was heading into Kentucky, he did the same thing at Kentucky when he got the opportunity to have the ball in his hands more, and he really shot up. And now he's one of the most improved players in the NBA. He's one of the more complete 3-level scoring guards in the NBA, in my opinion. And really the same thing with Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell came into the NBA. We thought he was going to be a different player than what he was now. He was improving as a shooter, but he wasn't a great shooter when he came into the NBA. Right? He was more known for attacking, getting downhill, using his athleticism to finish at the basket. And then he was known also on the defensive side of the ball as well. And I would still like to think that he can show more of that defense and more of that's going to come out with his new role with the Cleveland Cavaliers. But he's become really a perimeter-based scorer, and he's improved leaps and bounds as a shooter. What's crazy was I went back and I watched the film, and I never thought that he wasn't going to be a good shooter because of the way his form looked and because of how he projected. And in big games when he did hit a number of perimeter shots in a row. And I went back and I remember thinking in that draft class, the same with SGA, like I can go through all the boxes that I have in a list, kind of like what you alluded to earlier, Caleb, and I can check every single box. And I go back and I'm like, what's going to keep this player from succeeding in the NBA? Like, how is this player going to fail? And when you run into prospects like that, sure, the case might not be as clear for one as it is for you, but when I can actually go through and I can check off all those check boxes and the case just seems so obvious to me. And then when that player actually goes into the NBA and it turns out they're not just hitting on a role player level, these guys are like legitimate stars in the NBA. Of course that makes me feel good about myself as an evaluator. But in my mind, like I didn't do anything special. I looked at certain criteria, how I evaluate guards, and they checked all the boxes. And I had a feeling that they were going to be really successful in the NBA, and it turns out they are. That hasn't worked for every single prospect I've evaluated. I have misses. I wrote about like 10 plus misses in a column on No Ceilings NBA a few weeks ago. It doesn't work every time, but those two guys in particular were just an example of they did enough things well in the court to where I didn't see how they would fail in the NBA, and that's what drove me being higher on them than consensus, and it's worked out pretty well. Who are some of the guys who you've been higher on who have worked out, Caleb?
So I'd say most recently, I was really, this is what kind of got me inspired into like maybe taking a deeper look into scouting, is when I actually started to watch more college film and find some under the radar guys. Like I'd just basically done most of my scouting up to that point through NBA 2K and like the draft classes. And I'd just like look and see who's in there, like, familiarize myself and then watch them in real life. And it was the first time that I went through and actually looked at college rosters and been like, oh, this team performed really well in this area. I wonder what impact players they had there. And Trey Murphy III was one that really popped out to me. And then I started following his individual player development. Like just he trains prominently with the Miami Hoop School. So they put a lot of the stuff out on Instagram in the offseason and stuff like that. And so I'd been keeping up with a lot of that stuff. And then when I finally got my hands on Synergy right before that draft, I went on there and was looking at some of the shooting stuff. And I was like, this guy can just shoot the cover off the basketball. And his jumper is so good. And it's so clean and pure. He's got that nice long arm, so he kind of gets like a good slingshot going with kind of his style. But it's very very smooth, very quick. And I was like, that guy looks like he could be a lethal like catch and shoot player in the league. And then with the other stuff, more the individual player development that I'd seen go in, so I can look at the Synergy stuff and say, yeah, obviously everybody knows this guy can shoot. But I knew going into it that this kid's got bounce. Like he's got like a 40-inch vertical and can yam on people. And it's just a matter of him getting the confidence and adding some of the handle stuff to be a more prominent 3-level scorer, possibly. At least inside and outside. I don't the mid-range stuff. I'd still just think because his jumper's so good that I've seen him just hit countless. I think my question is, does he develop like a fadeaway because he's so lengthy? I think that if he started to develop a post game, he'd be dirty. But that's my player development plan for Trey Murphy. But he's a guy that I've been really excited about watching, especially in summer league. You know, I know that you've said on here that you have to be weary with summer league stuff, and I've always kind of kept that in the back of my mind even before I'd heard that from you. I just, you know, it's summer league. It makes sense that a guy who is a top, 20 pick, coming back in his sophomore season does really well in summer league. But it was some of the on-ball dribbling stuff that I'd seen like him in workouts doing, like, a little cross between get a guy on his hip and then bank off the glass in the mid-range. And I was like, oh, okay. So here's the development that I'd seen on my own time. And I'm now starting to see to work some of that stuff into his game to pair with, he is a dynamic athlete. He had a bunch of posters, dunks that were going viral at the end of the season, as well as being the best 3-point shooter out of all rookies. So, I mean, as far as my stuff now, that's really my only hit. But I will say that in terms of college hits, I was really high on Johnny Davis 2 years ago when he came in, and to see him kind of turn his stuff around here at my alma mater at Wisconsin, it was really cool. And to see him be a top 10 pick out of Wisconsin, we haven't really had any of those besides like Frank Kaminsky. So it's always fun to see that.
Johnny Davis was a hit that I think is shared amongst the no ceilings community, very, very much so. And we wish nothing but the best for him in the NBA. I don't think summer league is an indicator that Johnny Davis is going to suck in the NBA. I will just say that. I wouldn't be too worried about some of the summer league stuff. I think Johnny Davis is going to be a fine player in the NBA. So hopefully
he has everything that you look for in good combo guards. I think he checks all those boxes for guys who can have combo guard impact at either the one or the two.
My misses, my greatest misses, I would classify those as Tyrese Maxey and Josh Jackson for different reasons for each, but Maxey really, I had questions about the shooting with Maxey. I had questions about the scoring efficiency. I had questions about if he was a real point guard, and I had questions about the defense. So those are very important characteristics, in particular for a lead guard, where I had question marks coming out. And I wasn't sure if he was going to answer the call and really answer those questions for me throughout his NBA career in terms of being a full-fledged starter in the NBA. But why he will be my greatest miss in my scouting career is because I pride myself on every single thing that I've talked about in this podcast. Every little piece of advice I've given, it really comes back to communication. It comes back to character. It comes back to work ethic. It comes back to all of those things that matter off the court. And Tyrese Maxey, we knew at Kentucky, he embodied all of those things. I knew that he embodied all of those things. And yet I still let some of those other questions really hold me down and say, no, I don't think he's going to live up to his potential, even if he works harder than virtually anybody else in his entire draft class. And lo and behold, Tyrese Maxey, a few years into the NBA, he was one of the best 3-point shooters in the entire league by percentage last year. So that, along with his killer speed, along with his improved finishing, along with his improved floater game, he's not a great passer. I don't even know if he's like an above average passer, but he's certainly at an average level at the very least. And I think he's on his way to being a good passer. So you throw all of those things together and improve 3-level scoring attack, being one of the better shooters at the guard spot in the entire league. I don't expect him to consistently hit that efficiency bar year after year, but the fact that he can be a 38 to 40% 3-point shooter, that really changes the game for him in a drastic way. And I think he'll continue to improve on the defensive side of the ball. And he has a ceiling. I don't know how high his ceiling is at this point. I really don't know how much of a star he can become in the NBA, but I'm fully bought in. I'm rooting for him. I'm proud that he's proven me far wrong. I had him ranked in the 20s. You take him in a redraft, he could go as high as like 3 or 4 in a redraft in that draft class. So Maxey will be my greatest miss. And then Josh Jackson is a lesson learned when I came back to what I said earlier about always being ready to change your evaluation based on information that you get, new information that you get. There were enough positives that spoke to me about Josh Jackson's game when I watched the film, but there are also plenty of other red flags, both on the court and off the court, in relation to Josh Jackson. I stuck with my opinion that I thought before the year that I really thought Josh Jackson was going to be the best wing in the class, that he was potentially deserving of a number 1 overall pick if everything came together for him. I hung too hard on that opinion, and I ignored all of the other red flags that were saying that it's going to be a little more difficult for him to reach that bar than I might have initially realized. So for 2 different reasons, those would be my 2 biggest misses. And I don't really think either of them come back to it's just all about the basketball that's being played on the court. It comes back to some of the other things that we've talked about with scouting tonight, that those are 2 prime examples where I've learned 2 massive lessons about scouting. What are your thoughts about those?
Okay, so since I haven't been, tracking as much of my stuffs in terms of like where I ranked guys, I thought back I went back and did some basketball reference, made sure that the years are right and that it was about the time. But when I first really started getting invested in college basketball was around like 2012, and a couple years later, they had some pretty good teams like Marcus Page, but one player on that team that I thought above all was like, oh my gosh, this guy is like the next great NBA role player, was Bryce Johnson. And Bryce Johnson, like, I saw him play, and I remember this is when I learned that you can't evaluate players off of when you see them in one single game. And I guess this is where kind of like I started my first time learning as a basketball scout, I guess, was, this guy can rebound against this one team. Like, I think it was in the tournament as a whole. I saw him playing like 3 games. And I remembered I was like telling all my friends, like, this guy is going to be the next best player in the NBA. And it was Bryce Johnson. And I didn't do any sort of forward thinking about like, draft prospect age, things like that matter. So I don't really have a good one, but that's like kind of my first one that I can remember where I was like all hyped up about a guy, and it just, I clearly missed the entire evaluation aspect of it.
No, I think that's a good example as well. And it just goes to show that we all have hits, we all have misses, but at the end of the day, if that's all you make it about, you're not going to find the same level of fun and ultimately the level of success you want to have in the game if you don't embrace all of the hits, all of the misses, and you bring it back to small or big. Why am I doing this? Yep.
Yeah.
100%. So, Caleb, that's going to do it for this episode of the Draft Deeper podcast. I'm so thankful that I was able to have you on and we were able to have a conversation that wasn't just, what do we think about this player's jump shot? We did a little differently tonight, but I think all in all, it was great dialogue to have. And hopefully other people out there listening were able to take something away from it. And I think that you're an upstanding individual, Caleb. You're going to be a great scout in the community. I can't wait to see what you keep doing with On the Clock as you move forward. Any other parting thoughts you want to give my audience before we close this one out?
I just want to reiterate how thankful I am with the opportunity, and thankful for you, Nate, for sharing your platform, and producer Kevin for sitting here with us. So I just want to reiterate that. I think that this was super insightful. I definitely still learned a lot from this conversation. And I think the more that people in the basketball community take the approach of not spamming opinions and things of that nature, but actually taking the time to talk with each other about how to actually improve and have conversations more like this with each other, I think only good things will happen.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm trying to do more of that each and every single day. We all make mistakes. We all have lapses in judgment, but if we learn from that and we come back to approaching all of this for the right reasons, trust me, it'll continue to be a much better space for everybody. So thank you so much for the kind words, Caleb, and for the kind words towards Kevin Black, my absolutely goated producer in this space. Draft Deeper would not be what it is without his help. So a sincere thank you to Kevin as well. The biggest thank you, as always, to my audience, those who listen to the Draft Deeper podcast each and every week. Thank you so much for doing so. If you aren't subscribed already, make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube. Please make sure you're following me on Twitter at Draft Deeper to get updates about the show, as well as anything else I'm doing in the space. And make sure you're following No Ceilings at No Ceilings NBA on Twitter, and make sure you're subscribed to the Substack, NoCeilingsNBA.com. We are not too far from flooding the community with plenty more 2023 NBA draft content. The floodgates will certainly open up soon enough, but they will be opening, as I said at the top of this podcast, in a few weeks. I will have Steven as well as Maxwell on. The big three, as Hunter Cruz dubbed us on social media earlier today. Shout out to Hunter and all the amazing work that he does on this platform, both in the NBA draft space as well as covering the WNBA. Hunter's the best. So thank you.
He's going to be on our show. He'll be on our show here in next week.
I need to have Hunter on Draft Deeper. I approached him once like a while ago about it. I definitely need to have Hunter on this platform.
I was shocked. I was shocked with his intellect and his historical knowledge. Is quite fun to talk to him.
No, Hunter's a great guy. So another thank you to him for potentially giving us a new nickname on the Draft Deeper podcast. But thank you again to everybody out there listening. I will be taking next week off. We'll be back in essentially about a week and a half to 2 weeks with the first episode of us covering the 2023 NBA draft cycle. I cannot wait. I'm so glad it's fall. It's Labor Day weekend. It's the turn. The NBA season's almost here. College will be starting up right after that. I got football going. This is my favorite time of the year. So I'm all jazzed up to keep talking hoops with everybody out there. But until we meet again on this podcast platform, thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.